Welcome back to my 80% tutorials. I am recording this coming off of a flu, so if my voice sounds a little weird, that's probably why. But anyway, we're finally on the last chapter of the beacon, and it is a well-fitting closer for the mission. It does have quite a fair bit of downtime, but it's home to the most iconic parts of the run, which makes it memorable regardless. I don't think there will be a ton of actual level content to cover here, but it will get pretty in-depth at points. That's all I really have to say for the preamble though, so let's get into it. Starting off the level, we have a bit of downtime before the back door opens and we can progress. In the meantime, we're going to throw away any excess frags we have so that we can auto pick up gravity shards later. Eventually, both these doors will open up and we can start the power relay room. Just run around and sweep across the relays with the arc tool. While it does indicate you're slowly taking damage, it is almost impossible to die here, so don't worry about that at all. The only thing worth worrying about is the arc tool overheating. If you're too liberal with how long you shoot it, it can happen pretty easily, so be careful. If it does overheat, it's not a big deal, you'll just lose a few seconds and you can resume what you were doing. Once all the relays are powered though, hold up against the door and slide up as soon as possible and get back to the control room. Progression here is tied to your positioning, so you want to be snappy. But then we have another dialogue sequence, then you can embark into BT once they're done. Swap to Ronin, then we're going to dash as soon as the door opens, then dash again quickly after and get on top of this crash pod. Walk off of it, then phase dash and crouch to slide over this rock and onto the pipes. If you're falling short on this phase dash, it usually means you're doing it too early. But moving on, we're just going to keep dashing up this ramp, which brings us into moon boots. This is a trick that abuses the hover ability from the brute loadout to get lower gravity. When you hover, the game gives you roughly 15% reduced gravity in addition to pushing you upward, then removes the gravity reduction once it finishes, so if you interrupt it, you keep that low gravity. We do this by disembarking during it. However, you can't disembark if you're not grounded, so we wedge ourselves under a ceiling to do so. Now back to the actual setup, we're dashing along the ramp, then we're going to switch to brute at any point before the door. Then keep dashing toward the door. You can do the trick on multiple spots in the door, but it's generally faster to line up with this middle seam of the door. And then we're going to do what I just described. Hover against the door, right under the ceiling, then disembark as soon as possible. Then shoot the switch on the wall to open the door and progress. And if done right, you can jump around and you'll notice that you're a bit floatier. This means you hit it, which will come in handy for the next segment. Before that though, I want to touch on something else that can happen here, which is called fast BT. Sometimes BT will move instantly as you open the door, and sometimes he will stand around for a second. We're not sure why this happens, there's been supposed setups that try to make it consistent, but ultimately it seems nothing is 100% consistent here. It seems to be a small random time save / time loss that can happen, but that's pretty much it for Moon Boots. Now just wait for BT to finish his dialogue and pick you up. And when this happens, make sure you're standing still. Don't jump or crouch because that will mess up the next sequence coming up, Super Fastball. This is arguably the most iconic part of the speedrun, but is also one of the most difficult. It will probably take a while before you can do the whole thing consistently, but doing just part of it is going to save time, which is why I'm including it here. Typically, BT will throw you straight up the wall suspended ahead in order to access the first building and eventually navigate to the module located in the other dish. Well, we can do a lot better. By buffering a jump out of his hand combined with a reduced gravity, you can soar right over all the buildings and skip what would otherwise be a lot of slow and awkward navigation on the ground. So to do this, just hold the jump button before he releases you. Now we're going to aim to take the same route through this area every time. And also, because everyone always asks, you cannot use this rail to get to the module. This skips various triggers, which then causes the dish fight later to not start, preventing you from progressing any farther. But back to the actual route, once BT throws you, start strafing a little bit to the right, enough to get on the right side of this crane arm. Then once you're roughly at the same height as the arm, double jump to get over it and land on the rail ahead. This is the first trigger that people sometimes miss. If you go too far to the left at the start, then there's a good chance you miss it. You should be fine though if you generally follow what I'm showing here. Even if you do miss it, it's very easy to hit on the way back, it just limits some of your route options later, so it's not a big deal. It's also worth mentioning that, for whatever reason, the physics works differently here if you load a quick save where you are already in BT's hand. You tend to overshoot your usual jump pathing in this case. So when practicing, make sure to set your quick save before getting in BT's hand. You can also just adjust your jump timing to be slightly earlier if you're running no cutscenes or something. But once you land on the rail, double jump across to this first building. And to time your double jump here, I recommend waiting until the roof flattens out, then jump. Then do the exact same for this building ahead and to the left. And this entire time, you want to try to keep strafing between jumps while also being mindful of lurch. So make sure to wait out the roughly half-second lurch window after each jump. No lurch double jumps are also an option here if you want to learn that early. But once you land on the second building, we're going to do an extended slide hop to get enough height to wall bump the crane arm. And quick reminder, an extended slide hop is where you hold your slide for a brief moment before jumping, which gives you more height. But then after the wall bump, strafe to the right to dodge the tip of the crane arm, then double jump to the curved wall ahead. Get another wall bump off this wall, then double jump to the platform ahead. Here we're going to strafe to the right and grab the wall on the right side, but you need to take a pretty wide line from the left because there's another trigger that you need to hit here. It extends about all the way to this corner before the wall, but only sticks out as much as the platform to the left. So just don't cut the corner too tight and you should be good. Once you're on the wall though, just eat the wall run to slow yourself down, then jump around to the other side. And that is the brunt of Super Fastball. But doing all of that in one go is pretty hard, so let's talk about backups. Usually for any given strat there'll be a couple backups, but with Super Fastball there's so many points of failure and so many backup routes as a result of that. So I'm going to show one simple low speed route all the way through that you can fall back on at any point. This first part is the most tricky, but luckily failing this early is very rare. We're going to grab the wall and navigate to the other side of the building. Our goal is really just to get a lot of height so that platform is more forgiving. So come to this left side and jump around this building to grab the wall on the other side. Then jump across to the next building, then we're going to jump on top of this wall to make it across to the next building. At this point we have a nice vantage point to just freely jump between rooftops. So you can do so until you get to this next crane. Here you'll have to jump off this suspended wall and strafe across to this lower platform. On the other side, climb up the ledge of this wall to go up the floor. Then double jump up to this higher wall to get across to the next platform. Then you can fall down and hit the trigger. And finally, to get across, climb up this metal frame, then grab this wall up and to the left to jump across. And then you'll converge with the Super Fastball route. All that's left is to jump across to the module, but because of how far away it is, we're going to need gravity stars for that. These are another explosive weapon you can use to boost yourself. They are very strong, but somehow don't kill you at point blank, so they are very effective for boosting. Their only downside is that they don't arm until they are thrown and collide with something, so you either have to wait for it to explode or throw it far ahead of you, but that takes a lot of practice. So we're going to do the former over on this left side. Slide up to this crate to grab them, then stand roughly on this cross in the ground. Then throw a star along this line of the wall just a little bit down from the top. When the gravity star stops moving, sprint toward the wall, then grab it, and jump off once close enough. With a good boost, you'll fly straight across and you can navigate up to the module. With a mediocre boost, sometimes you can land on this lower part of the dish and climb up from there. Any worse though, you'll have to retry. Now before you grab the module, you'll want to make note of if there are Marvins standing on these metal platforms attached to the dish. If they're there, that means you successfully hit all the triggers and can progress. If not, you missed at least one of them and you'll have to get it on the way back. And I'll cover the specifics of that shortly. For now, just interact with the module, but make sure not to crouch when doing this. It won't have any immediate effect, but if you revert to this checkpoint, you will get suffocated and die, which will softlock you. So try to avoid that. Now we need to return the module back to the first dish, and there's two ways to approach this. The first is simply just using normal movement to navigate. To start off, you'll slide up off this module container and land below. Keep slide hopping along until you get to this wall and climb up. Get on top of the building, then jump off the stack of metal to cross the gap. If you miss the trigger here, there will be an invisible wall blocking you from the roof, so you'll have to instead round the corner first and hit it before continuing. To do so, you're going to have to go as far as grabbing the bottom half of this metal and glass wall, which I showed in the backup route. You'll know you hit it if the objective updates. Then from here, you can simply turn around and climb back up to the metal stack to jump across. Back to the route though. For the rest of this movement sequence, you can more or less take the intended route along these activatable platforms by kicking between them. If you get a good amount of speed, you can opt to skip some of the walls too for a better line. You'll eventually come to this circular building with the crane, which I'll pick back up in a minute. First, let's cover the other approach to this segment, which is using a gravity star at the start. There are a couple ways I would recommend doing this when first starting out. The first is a setup called Poverty Zipless or P-Zip, and Zipless at this point is an obsolete name for this skill level, but regardless, that's what it's called. To do this setup, we're going to mantle the corner of this pillar, then don't move. Pull out the Grav star and aim the trajectory line so it lands between these 4 dots on the ground. As it reaches its peak, slide off and jump into it, then kick off the wall to cross the gap. Another method is the Queen of Dance setup, which is decently fast and doesn't require a wall kick. For this one, you'll want to find these 2 triangles on the ground and stand on top of them. Then you're looking for this white mark on the wall. It's just after the midsection of the wall and upward from this long dark streak. Throw the Grav star at the bottom of that white mark, then double jump up to the wall run, and jump off once you get close. Another way is to throw the Grav star right in front of you at about sliding distance and just hit it raw. This is useful to learn because it allows you to boost anywhere. As a cue for when to slide and jump, some people use either the visual effects or audio or both. Specifically, you look for the little bits of debris surrounding it and listen for the whooshing sound. But personally, I count beats in my head in time with the visuals, which is a little hard to explain. Some seconds of the gravity star animation roughly line up with a visual cue. At 0 seconds, the star hits the ground. At 1 second, it starts rising. At 3 seconds, it explodes. I slide and jump at 2.5 seconds. So if you have a bit of musical inclination, you can subdivide that beat to time it. So in my head, it would sound like 0, 1, and 2, and. I slide on the and if you time it well, you get the perfect boost every time. And I mentioned you can do this anywhere, so you can set this up as soon as you land, but you can also use it as a backup off this wall, which is good to know. Now getting back to this circular building, or the milk aisle as some like to call it, we're going to learn what's called poverty meal deal, and really just the whole dish fight in general. This is a simpler version of a strat that I'll cover in the later difficulties called Tesco meal deal. We're going to navigate around the back side and enter the second floor. There are 3 grunts that will spawn standing around the zipline that we need to kill. Be careful not to confuse them with the grunts actually riding the zipline. It's also possible that if you're a bit slow getting to the grunts, they can run around to other parts of the building, especially downstairs, so just be wary of that. And each of the 3 grunts will shave 3 seconds off the dish fight for a total of 9 seconds. The fastest way to do this, if you have the gravity stars for it, is to just throw 2 of them in the room as you pass over the building. That will consistently kill those 3 grunts. After that though, start riding the zipline down, and you can shoot some of these other grunts if you want, but it's not that important. As you approach the bottom, you can start throwing any excess gravity stars you have at this Reaper to get some early damage. And once you're close enough, you can get off and embark into BT. As you regain control, immediately swap to Ronin, tactic cancel, and start shooting the Reaper to finish it off. A reminder, tactic canceling is when you use the Titan loadout's tactical ability to skip the animation of the gun being pulled out. You generally want to do this anytime you're trying to shoot immediately after swapping Titan loadouts. But again, the Reaper is the first priority here because if left alone, it can spawn a bunch of ticks and prolong the fight. After the Reaper though, swap down 1 more to Expedition, and then we're going to wait for this dropship on the left side of the arena to fly in. This can take a little bit of time though, so usually you'll have time to kill the stalkers behind you and shoot out a wave of rockets at everything else. When the dropship door opens, shoot at it to kill the grunts, and we can work on cleaning up the rest of the enemies. So let out another wave of rockets, and we're going to disembark to get the last couple guys that sometimes hide. The last couple grunts can be on top of this center platform and on this lower right platform where the first dropship goes. Once this first wave of enemies is dead though, there's still going to be endless stalkers spawning for about another 20 seconds. So to deal with them, we're going to stand on this upper platform with the L star that we grabbed in Beacon 1. From up here, you can just pivot between their spawn locations and go for headshots to kill them. They have 4 places at which they can appear. Under where the second dropship was, at the back of this platform, and then 2 more on this other side, both inside the tower and next to the cylinder. After killing them for long enough, you'll hear a bass drop, and that's how you know you're done the fight. If you don't like having to aim at the stalkers from a long distance, there is another way of going about this. Instead, you can make note of the time as the Reaper drops in. Then, instead of endlessly killing the stalkers at the end, keep the last few alive next to you. When you're 51 seconds into the fight, or 60 if you didn't kill the first 3 grunts, kill them using BT. This should reliably cause the fight to end without having to repeatedly kill them. Afterward, we're going to skip the fastball sequence that usually happens and just manually climb up to the module. This is pretty simple to do, just come over to this right tower and alternate between different wall surfaces to climb up. Once you get up to this first ledge, you can come around to the middle of the tower and there's a corner you can bump launch in to speed up the climb a bit. But you can still make it up in time with regular wall jumps if that's easier for you. Once you're up though, you can just slide hop over to the module and be ready to interact when it's down. Be careful not to get crushed by the arms though, because that can happen. At this point, the brunt of the level is done. All that's left really is to return to the control room and do one last Titan fight. So as you get into BT, start dashing toward the control room and switch to Ronin. At the ledge here, phase and dash, then just come over to the end of the pipes and look to the right. This is where the fight sequence starts. It starts off with 2 Reapers dropping in front of the control room. To deal with them, just do 3 melees on each of them. And we're only meleeing because there's a fixed wait time before the next drop, so no point in trying to optimize it. For the next drop, you're going to stand on this rock, prepare to arc wave, and look between these 4 rocks in the fog ahead. When the Reapers drop, dash forward and let the arc wave go. It should hit the 2 Reapers on the left. 2 pump the Reapers on the left with the Ronin gun, then switch to Brute, tactic cancel, and finish off the last one with the Brute gun. Something that tends to happen quite a bit though is the second Reaper won't die in the second shot because it's a little far and it's easy to miss the shot with all the visual noise on screen. In this case, just finish it off with the Brute gun, then switch to the last Reaper as usual. Once that wave is done though, quickly run back to that same spot in the pipes, swap to Scorch, and look at this rock on the right for the spawn minute. Then after you hear the Titans start dropping, dash to the left of the rock, throw down a firewall to the right in between these 2 rocks, and position yourself in front of this Brute's shield. I'll note that if you were fast on the Reapers, your firewall won't be off cooldown in time, which is fine. You can skip it and still achieve the same behavior here if you position yourself right. Throw down both of your gas traps, and as soon as the Ronin dashes forward, look up and thermal shield to duplicate the traps. This should melt both of them very fast. And for a quick clarification, gas trap duplication is when you ignite the trap by aiming your shield upward. This ignites it multiple times, causing it to do much more damage than it usually would. Now, the routes for these fight sequences are all pretty dependent on specific behaviors from the enemies, so it's not uncommon for things to go awry. So if anything weird happens, a good failsafe is usually to just swap to tone and go for 3-shot missile combos on everything. After those 3 waves though, we get into Richter Fight. Before he drops down, swap to Ronin and just get roughly between this rock and the pod. Coming out of the cutscene, hold your arc wave button to buffer, then release it as soon as the fight starts. Go for 2 shots with the gun, then core. Stay close to him and melee him 3 times. I'll also note here that there is a bug where if you melee as soon as possible, it won't register the hit. So to avoid this, just wait the tiniest bit before hitting him. Once you've hit him 3 times and ran out of core, finish off his first health bar with the gun. At this point, Richter will either nuke eject or keep fighting, indicated by whether or not his chassis starts glowing. If he nuke ejects, you're pretty much done with the fight. If not, the simplest way to finish him off is to just melee him and sit through the execute cutscene. Now to finish off the level, we just need to get BT in the control room once again. If you had to execute Richter, you'll do pretty much the same thing you did in Beacon 1, just throw down a firewall in the elevator and disembark. However, if you nuke ejected, you can glitch BT in the control room early, saving 2 seconds. This is called Elmo Clip. To do this, you'll want to switch to Brute immediately after the last shot, then hover and crouch on top of this geometry sticking out of the control room. As far as I know, it doesn't matter whether you use the left or right side here. You also want to make sure not to hold forward up against the wall as that can drag you down. This only happens at higher frame rates though, so you can disregard it if you're at a lower frame rate. I don't know exactly where the cutoff is, but switching between 79 and 144 was enough to make the difference from my testing. Moving on though, you want to deliberately wait for the hover to top out, then drift onto the roof. Once you get on top, you can disembark to disembark clip into the room. You'll then have to re-embark BT to trigger the elevator. Once you see that it's moving, disembark one more time so that BT is free to teleport. A funny side effect of this trick is it actually puts you outside for the remainder of the level, so you're free to run around as the dialogue plays out. You can just wait for the fade out and the final cutscene to play. And that'll be it for the Beacon mission. This chapter can definitely feel like a lot as it's one of the longest levels in the game, but nowadays I find it really just boils down to the 2 big movement sequences in the middle. The rest of the level is either downtime or segments that become mostly trivial after just a little bit of practice. The next level, Trial by Fire, isn't quite as long as this one, so hopefully it'll be a quicker learn. See you there. For intermediate strats, we're not going to be adding much to this first leg of the level. I just want to mention that you should definitely be using lurchless double jumps during super fastball, and that you can also tap shift at the end to make some of the turns easier. If you picked up the softball in Beacon 2, then you can use it to boost you to the gravity star pickup. You can also use it after the power relay room if you want that tiny bit of time save. Other than that though, we can just skip right to the return segment where the new strats really start to pop up. So the way you go about this gravity star boost can be improved a fair bit. Instead, we're going to do an early throw so we can get boosted as soon as we land after the module grab. For this setup, take a step or 2 after gaining control, then jump to the left and strafe to the right as you land on the antenna. As you strafe back to the left is when you want to release the gravity star, and you're aiming for the center of this platform sticking out. Then if you take some pretty average strafes, this should time it perfectly and you'll get boosted to the wall. Say your gravity star throw is a bit off though. In these cases, you can adjust your strafing to save it. If you throw it a bit too far, you can take more narrow strafes to tighten up your line. Or if you threw it short, you can take wide strafes and even hold back a bit to slow yourself down. But this is definitely something you're going to have to practice a bit before you get comfortable with adjusting on the fly. There is another setup here that is a bit faster, but also a bit harder. You can instead sprint and slide directly out of the cutscene and throw the gravity star a bit earlier. For this method, you want to slide forward and right and do it a bit earlier than you think. You can't buffer it, but you can kind of do it as you're exiting the cutscene, though the animation glitches out a bit. For the throw, you'll again want to throw it as you're strafing and moving your camera across the platform. You want it to land in this bottom quadrant of the platform. To help aim this, I like to line up my crosshair roughly along this top edge of the platform and release. Again, like the last method, just strafe for the gravity star to get boosted. And you can adjust your strafes if needed, though I find I'm usually having to take narrower strafes with this setup. Moving on, we're going to be dipping our toes into a new strat, Tesco Meal Deal. And no, I will not be explaining the rationale behind this name. This strat is essentially a reverse trigger order, or RTO, of Dish Fight, which yields some unexpected results. We hit the trigger at the Dish Fight arena before the one at the crane, which cuts out the endless stalker spawns, making it less of an auto-scroller and ultimately saving about 30 seconds over the intended route. There are a lot of ways to do this strat, many of which are pretty hard, so I'm only going to go over the easier route for now. The easy route being Tesco Express. This is where we navigate up to the crane arm without hitting the trigger, then jumping out to hit the arena trigger and tap strafing back in. For this first part of getting up to the crane, there are two main ways of doing this. The first way, and the one I'd recommend, is jumping off these walls to climb up on the side of the rail. As you're coming through, you'll want to pay attention to these last four walls of this segment. You want to jump from the first wall on the right to the one on the left, then jump off the top of the next wall on the right. This will give you enough height to fit through this joint and crouch kick off the side of the big rail above. Then you can land near the edge of it and do an extended slide hop and a double jump to make it across to the crane. I will note that you are very close to the crane trigger here. It is pretty much right below you. So you want to double jump fairly early here and stay crouched so your feet aren't clipping the trigger. If you see the objective update here, that means you touched it and you'll have to resort to Poverty Meal Deal. The other way to get up to the crane here though is using a platform launch. You can activate any of these upward swinging platforms as you fall into them to get launched upward and inherit a ton of platform velocity. Compared to the other method though, this strat is quite a bit more volatile. The launch you get is very dependent on your positioning and speed going into it, so it can be tough to control. At this skill level though, I would recommend activating the platform pretty early so you're only catching the last little bit of the animation. This is usually enough to at least jump up to the rail above and dodge the trigger like before, but sometimes you can jump directly to the crane with enough speed and height. Once you get to the crane though, you can slow down to about 50 or 40 speed and carry that into the jump. It's also possible to just C-flip off the side if you happen to kill your speed too much. Now for this 180, you want to start by taking a wide line out to the left, as that will give you enough room to tap strafe back in. If you have CL Show Pause turned on, you can wait for your X value to go past -500 to know you hit the trigger. If not, you can look down while swapping weapons and use the suspended wall here as a rough visual cue. I typically wait for the edge of the wall to almost leave the bottom of my screen. I also recommend delaying the double jump as much as possible here. Really try to strafe back in as much as you can before it, so it's more of a 90-degree turn than a 180. I find that helps with consistency quite a lot. You may also find it useful to try spam strafing here instead for a bit more lurch. From here you'll want to jump from the top of the wall, whether you directly land up there or need to climb up, and throw an early gravity start into the room to set up for Dish Fight. I'll also note here that if you hit the arena trigger but don't quite reach the wall and get a quick death, it's faster to take it. You won't have to hit the arena trigger again. This also goes for any other strats here, which I'll be covering in the expert difficulty. Moving on from this section though, the speed of Dish Fight actually matters now since we did Tesco. So at this point, you want to make sure you have the EVA out, then as I mentioned before, throw a gravity start into the room early. You don't need to throw it super early, but it will affect some timings later in the fight. Once you're in, you need to kill these 3 grunts that are not on the zipline before progressing with the rest of the fight if you want to skip the auto-scroller. Ideally, you want to shoot all 3 before leaving, but killing only 1 or 2 should be fine since the gravity star will kill the others. You want to slide hop into the gravity well for a boost, then take that speed into a kick off the wall and across the gap. I know I'm on good tempo if I'm able to get past these grunts on the zipline. I'll also note here as well, when you skip grabbing the ziplines here, grabbing them at any point later in the level crashes your game, so keep that in mind. If you miss the grab timing though, you can either make it across with a C-flip and do a crouch kick, or grab the zipline. While you're jumping across though, you want to try and shoot these grunts on the ziplines. This is because they can hide on the higher platforms and draw out the fight longer than it needs to be. Something to note here as well is their hurt boxes become a little desynced when on ziplines, so you'll want to aim more toward their front side. Getting into the meat of the fight now, our goal is to finish it as these grunts exit the second dropship. I'll admit though that getting it that fast is very tight. I originally wrote this section for the expert difficulty before Tesco Express got developed, so you might lag behind a bit until you become very well practiced with this section. This route is going to be pretty similar to what it was before, but our execution needs to be a lot tighter since a segment of endless stalker spawns gets skipped. So throw your excess gravity stars at the Reaper and embark. Before we swap to Ronin, we're going to let out a wave of rockets on the left side with Brute. You want to try to get these close-up stalkers in the shelter and the two that spawn farther back. Then swap to Ronin, dash, and kill the Reaper before it can spawn ticks. Once it's dead, dash to the right and melee these stalkers on the ledge. Simultaneously, you should be stepping on any stalkers that have already dropped down from that ledge. Swap back to Brute and hover. Tactic cancel, then shoot at each of these three grunts on the platform. Then you should barely have enough time to swap to Expedition, shoot out another wave of rockets, and shoot the grunts exiting the second dropship. This is the ideal fight. More often than not though, there will be some leftover stalkers from the rockets missing, or there may be grunts up top if you miss them on the zipline. In this case, you can usually just shoot them since there shouldn't be that many. The execution needed to get this ideal fight is pretty hard though, so let's go over some adjustments you can do on the fly, whether you had a bad Grav boost or messed up something else. The first backup you'll want to do if you're only slightly behind where you need to be, as in maybe you got the Grav boost but you're only going 60 or so across the gap. In this case, you'll want to skip the first wave of rockets when embarking on the BT, just go straight to killing the Reaper. It'll take longer to clear out the stalkers at the end, but it avoids the dropship grunts hiding in the corner of the arena, which is usually a bigger time loss. If you're really behind off the bat, say you completely missed the Grav boost, you can make it across with a CFEP and a crouch kick and snipe the grunts on the zipline with the L-Star. After embarking, do the original strat, but before dashing to the right side, you can swap to Expedition and shoot the grunts through the dropship as it's flying across. Or if you were a bit slower, just shoot them as they're exiting. Then continue as normal to end the fight. Now if you killed everything in the arena and the fight didn't finish, then you likely missed one of the grunts in the other building before the fight. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to deal with this after the fact. However, if you grab the zipline on the way down, you can ride it back up without fear of crashing to find the grunt you missed. Typically, they like to run downstairs. The rest of the level will play out as usual though. The only note I'll make is you're going to be positioned farther away from the module when the fight ends, so you're likely going to lose time on the climb too. Now for the last intermediate strat, we have Richter BBQ, which is where we fight Richter with the Scorch loadout instead of Ronin. The setup is a bit particular though. First off, we need to slightly adjust the way we kill the two Titans before him because we need our gas traps to be off cooldown. To do this, you'll want to throw down the gas traps here a bit earlier to the left of this rock. The rest is the same though. We just want to get the gas traps out and recharging earlier. Now before Richter drops down, you want to get in the specific position. You're looking for this kind of heart-shaped texture on the ground. You want to stand a little bit behind it, then when Richter drops, you want to crouch and walk a little past the right side of it to get crouch locked under Richter. This should make Richter start the fight with a stomp attack, which gives you time to set up gas trap tubes. So for the fight sequence, immediately throw down both gas traps, shield upward, wait for the hit marker, firewall, shoot him, then rush him down with the rest of your shield meter. And while this first part is happening, you want to move back so that you're comfortably in front of Richter, and you also want to move slightly right so that you're positioned opposite of the rock and the crash pod behind him. This helps to keep him boxed in for the fight. With any luck, Richter should get melted pretty quickly. If he doesn't do the stomp animation or he generally doesn't behave predictably, you can punch him back into the gas traps to try and salvage it. Worst case scenario though, you can always fall back to the Ronin core strat. Now for Elmo Clip, because we use gas traps for the fight, the Brute hover ability is now on cooldown. So we're instead going to use Flight Core, which also lets us hover. This works mostly the same as before, but there are some things that can go wrong due to the extra flight duration. To set this up, you want to dash fairly close to the building before hovering. You want to drift toward the wall and then release all your movement inputs before making contact. Around the top, you should get a little stuck, then you can hold forward and disembark, and that usually works. If you float past the ledge, you'll just lose a few seconds from having to wait for the hover to finish, which isn't a huge deal. Now because the Flight Core hover lasts a lot longer, you can float away in the control room and lose time if you're not careful, so make sure to flick down and embark immediately while holding backward. You need to be quick or there's a small risk you'll float away. That's it for intermediate shots though. Okay, for expert strats, things will start to get pretty wild now. Starting with Super Fastball, there are a couple upgrades to make. This first route is called Super Fastball Deluxe. This route grabs gravity stars from this building during the movement sequence, then uses them at the end to get to the module early, saving roughly 8 seconds. Getting the gravity stars mid-sequence though really requires you to thread the needle, so runners have made a lot of different setups for this. I'm going to cover the one I use as well as another setup that is pretty widely used. For my setup, we're going to do a lurchless jump out of BT's hand and strafe to the right as usual. And you should be doing the lurchless input for any setup really at this skill level. Once you're strafing though, you want to look at this pillar and this pocket in the building in the background. When the left edge of the pillar and the left edge of the pocket align, that's when you double jump. Start strafing back to the left and slide on this tiny pole. Instantly double jump after sliding off and strafe back to the right into the building. Slide up on the middle of the weapon crate to grab the gravity stars, then do another slide up right as you land on it. And you really want to avoid going too far left here to grab as many grav stars as possible because it's going to give you more room for error in the upcoming sections. But then double jump to this pipe sticking out of the building, then double jump to the pulley. If you space your double jumps pretty evenly, the spacing should work out. After this though, the movement is the same until we get to the gravity star boost, which I'll cover after this last setup. For the other setup, it's going to start the same, lurchless jump and strafe right, but instead we're going to jump when the pillar aligns with this building on the left. Then again, straight back to the left and land on the corner of this wall. From here, double jump up to the top of the box for the gravity stars, and the rest is the same as the last setup. You can use whatever setup you prefer or look at other runners for more options. I will say my setup which slides off the pole does look scary, but I find it's not that bad since you're working with about the same speed and spacing each time. I also find it's more consistent at grabbing all 4 gravity stars for some reason, which will help for Tesco meal deal later. And before we move on, I find there's a common problem people run into when first learning this, which is too much speed loss. This results in you not being able to make the jumps you need to make because they are already kind of tight. The unfortunate solution to this is just better movement. More specifically, you want to focus on leaving the ground as soon as you touch it to minimize friction. You also want to have cleaner and more effective strafing, don't get lazy with it. You're guaranteed to experience some speed loss from touching the ground, but constantly strafing between jumps will ensure that you gain that speed back. Alright, now let's cover the gravity star boost. The simplest way to do this is to just throw it kind of early after you run the corner and jump into it raw. If you want to speed this up though, you can throw it early enough to transition right into it. To set this up, start by grabbing the wall for consistent speed. Line up the trajectory line with the middle of the platform, then once you're at this black line, throw it and jump off. You don't want to throw and jump at the same time, as that will cause the gravity star to overshoot. Instead, you want to jump off right after the throw. Then you can bunny hop into it for extra height and work your way up to the module. Now for the next upgrade to this section, let's talk about Hyper Fastball. This is a route that opts to go around the left side of the final building and keep speed all the way to the module grab, saving about 2 seconds over Deluxe. To do this route, instead of wall bumping this curved wall, we're going to jump up to the top left side of the building, then double jump to this control panel in the crane's housing. It's not quite an immediate double jump, but you want to input it very early, then proceed to strafe around the building. This is pretty particular though because of the trigger. It only extends as far as the lower platform does, so I usually look down a bit to make sure I'm passing over the corner of that platform, then tap strafe back to the right to round the building. You can spam strafe, but weirdly enough I find normal tap strafing to be more effective. From here you can kick off this angled wall, land at the corner of this railing, and navigate your way up to the module. And that's Hyper Fastball. There are some alternate routes for the ending here that I would like to cover though. The first of these is Swagball, which is actually faster than every other strat here, but it is very precise. If you have enough speed coming off of the crouch kick, you can bunny hop off this pillar and jump almost straight to the module. I wouldn't particularly recommend this for full game, but it is an option. Another option, if you don't have quite enough height, is you can tap strafe to the right off the crouch kick and jump across to the arm attached to the module and climb up. If your speed is not great though, you can always just grab boost off this platform, similarly to Deluxe. That's everything for Hyper Fastball though. But out of the frying pan into the fire, we have another really hard movement sequence as we revisit Tesco Meal Deal. At this skill level, it becomes one of the more complicated flowcharts in the game from how many variations and backups there are, so you'll need to bear with me a little. I'm going to start by showing the fastest and most ideal way to clear this entire segment, then I'll get into some other variations and backups. So we're going to start with Kooparang Skip, which skips the now semi-obsolete Kooparang strat. This is where you get platform velocity from one of these swinging platforms and carry it all the way to the dish fight trigger, then double jump and spam strafe to turn all the way back to the milk aisle. Just like before, the sequence will start with a grab boost off the module grab, then we're going to set up for the platform launch. As you come into the platforming section, you want to aim to have about 90 speed or more. From here, you want to fall into either the second or third upward swinging platform as it's activating, then jump. Most people use the second. While this is really cool, it's also a little janky because of how fast the platform is moving and how collision with moving platforms is handled. To get the best results, you generally want to activate the platform as late as possible and aim for the right edge. You also want to be somewhat close to the far side of the platform on impact so you can dodge these joints on your way up. With any luck, you'll get a ton of upward velocity off the platform, which will set you up well for Cooperang skip. Since it's hard to get a full 180 off this jump, you want to strafe out far to the left then back in after the platform launch. Then wait until you're well past the suspended wall and go for it. And again, using CL Show Pause also works as a cue here. This should allow you to make it with a more shallow redirect. Then finally, as you're falling down, preemptively throw the gravity star down for the start of Dish Fight. At this point, we converge with other strats, so let's get into some of those other options now. For some of you, the spam strafe might be too big an ask, so there are other ways to return back to the building with this much platform velocity. The next two fastest strats are very similar speeds, so you can choose whichever one you prefer. The first of these is going to be the original Cooperang strat, where instead of using lurch to turn around, we kick off the beacon tower. When going for this, you'll want to aim for this curved wall in the middle as it usually gives the best results. You can kick off this tower on the left, but it is a lot more likely to not give you a jump refresh. And I find going into the kick with a lot of upward speed only exacerbates the problem, so I recommend timing it to where you're around the peak of your jump or a bit after the peak. Assuming you got the kick to register though, you should be able to just double jump back to the building. The other strat here, which I covered in the intermediate difficulty, is Tesco Express, where you jump off the top of the crane, then tap strafe and 180 back to the suspended wall. There's really nothing new to add here, just that you'll probably have to double jump earlier to land on the crane with the extra platform velocity. Now what happens if you don't get the greatest platform launch? In this case, assuming you're able to make it to the Dish Fight arena, you can still get back to the crane building using a gravity star boost. You'll want to climb up to this platform on the right, and we'll use it as a launch point. The jump back across is really tight, so it's nice to have a precise setup for this boost. For mine, I get in the corner, throw down the gravity star. When it hits the ground, I start sprinting toward this cross in the ground. When I get to the cross, I do a 180, then slide and jump into the gravity well once I'm close enough. And again, I'll climb up the wall for a good setup into the fight. If you can tell you got a less than ideal boost, you can tap strafe and turn around and try again. But if you're out of gravity stars, you'll have to checkpoint reset back to the swinging platforms. It's worth mentioning that you can also Grav boost off these upper platforms on the beacon tower if you got enough height from the platform launch. And since they're higher up, they're a lot more lenient and you don't really need a precise setup. Now what happens if you get a pretty bad platform launch or completely missed it? In this case, you can just do Poverty Meal Deal, but it'll be faster to fall back to the original Tesco Express strats. Now to finish off the video, there are a number of optimizations we can add to this whole module retrieval sequence. These all contribute to an overarching strat called Yapless, where we deliberately go out of our way to dodge various dialogue triggers. It turns out that the module container lowering after Dish Fight is pace locked by all the dialogue lines that get queued up during the level. It's pretty hard to hit this pace though, so you only need to look into this once you become very proficient at Hyper Fastball, Tesco Meal Deal, and the new Dish Fight. At that point, you'll notice that you start hitting a wall with your insert module times. So let's quickly go over a broad overview of all the little optimizations here. Selecting the top dialogue option at the start of the fastball sequence saves about 3 seconds. Dodging this trigger during the Hyper Fastball sequence saves about 5 seconds. Dodging this trigger on the Marvin platform saves about 3 seconds. Dodging this trigger during the zipless sequence saves about 3 seconds. And finally, not using these zip lines saves about 5 seconds. To start, these first and last optimizations are pretty trivial. You can just hit the dialogue option, and avoiding these zip lines is pretty manageable with a grab boost and a crouch kick off the wall. The others can take a bit more practice though. This first trigger is probably the hardest to deal with and requires us to reroute this middle section. So to start off this reroute, instead of slide hopping off the weapon crate with the gravity stars, we're going to immediately double jump just before it, while still picking them up of course. Then we're going to land on the right side of this roof to dodge the trigger, then strafe back to the left. Straight back to the right and do an extended bunny hop off this pole. Let yourself slide off a bit before jumping. You can do it with a regular bunny hop, but this helps your height quite a bit more. Crouch kick off this curved wall and slide up off the platform ahead. Then we converge with a normal hyper route at this point. I'll note that since we're taking a lower line throughout most of the sequence, it becomes considerably harder to not fall short anywhere and actually keep speed all the way through. So there are 2 things you want to focus on during this route: strafing and ground friction. I know I mentioned this for the Deluxe route, but I think it's even more important this time. I find I can get pretty lazy with my strafing sometimes, so being more intentional and making full use of my airtime can net me a couple extra kph usually. As for ground friction, most people don't try to minimize it as it's easier to go early and completely miss the jump window, but I do think it's worth it here. Hitting 1 or 2 frame perfect jumps gives this strat a lot more leniency, I find, and it especially helped when I dropped my frame rate down to 60 from 144. Moving on though, the next trigger we need to dodge is the Marvin platform. Luckily for us, the trigger barely doesn't reach to the edge of the platform, which means you can actually crouch kick off of it without touching the trigger. It can be a little precise with how thin the platform is, but I find it's not too bad with a bit of practice. Alternatively, you can do any of the other strats I covered here when first going over Hyper Fastball, as they all easily dodge the trigger. Finally, for the last trigger we need to dodge, this one is conceptually pretty simple. You can just drop below this platform and crouch kick off the cylinder before the platform launch. The only tricky part about this is kicking off the cylinder, as getting the angle right is deceptively hard. It's very easy to miss it entirely or have too sharp an angle, which kills a lot of your speed. Unfortunately, there's no easy solution here, you just gotta get the angle right and hit it. That's all the dialogue skips. At the time of writing this, the fastest runners don't quite need all these time saves. We're still a couple seconds away from pace locking again, unless you hit swag ball, then you'll likely need to dodge every trigger. So you can usually drop one of these 3-second time saves without losing time. Personally, I would recommend not bothering with the cylinder kick, but the choice is up to you. And of course, there's always the option to not be optimal and just eat some time loss if, for example, dodging the first trigger is too hard. That's it for Beacon 3 though. Definitely one of the chunkier levels of the run, but like I said earlier, as you get better, it starts to boil down to mainly the fastball and return segments since they are the most non-trivial. But anyway, thanks for watching and good luck in the practice.